A sanctioned regional outcast just stepped directly into Sahel geopolitics arena now. For more than a decade, Western security frameworks shaped this region, yet attacks spread, trust eroded, and promised stability never arrived fully. What does this turning point mean for you watching Ibrahim Traoré now? The next moves could redraw global leverage lines. You are about to hear an explanation many analysts hint at but rarely assemble completely. Because it exposes how power actually shifts when smaller states stop waiting for permission and start testing alternatives. You will see the strategic map behind headlines. This is not casual information. Ignore this moment, and recent Burkina Faso news may look like routine diplomacy instead of a structural signal. Certain decisions linked to Ibrahim Traoré Burkina Faso could seem symbolic when they may actually be calculated leverage tests. Without this context, future developments might appear sudden or irrational when they are following a quiet strategic logic. Those who understand the pattern early recognize turning points before they become obvious. Those who do not usually notice only after the balance has already shifted. What looks like a routine diplomatic outreach is in fact a strategic signal, and one figure alone explains why observers are paying attention. Nearly 15 years of externally led security efforts failed to stabilize large parts of the Sahel. That single reality reframes everything about Ibrahim Traoré's recent moves. The shift did not begin abroad. It began locally. For over a decade, security across the region followed a Western structured model built on counter-insurgency missions, training programs, surveillance support, and multinational coordination frameworks. French deployments, American drone infrastructure, and European training initiatives formed a layered system designed to suppress armed groups and restore stability. On paper, it appeared comprehensive. On the ground, something else unfolded. Militant groups adapted faster than strategy manuals. Rural communities watched foreign rotations come and go while insecurity persisted. Border zones blurred. Trust in central governments weakened. The escalation point emerged when public frustration stopped being private. Young populations began comparing official briefings promising progress with lived realities showing little change. That perception gap mattered more than any single battlefield development. The first people affected were villagers in contested zones. They faced displacement, disrupted trade routes, and shrinking access to services long before policy analysts debated strategy effectiveness. Once local confidence eroded, political stability followed. This is why recent diplomatic diversification tied to Ibrahim Traoré is interpreted by many observers not as sudden ambition, but as a response to accumulated experience. Seen from that perspective, the external meetings are not the origin of change. They are the result of it. Leadership enters the story here not as symbolism, but as navigation. Under Ibrahim Traoré, the language of sovereignty shifted from rhetoric to positioning. Unlike transitional figures who merely inherit turbulence, he framed the regional moment as an opportunity to renegotiate assumptions. Public statements emphasized self-determination, strategic autonomy, and refusal to operate within a single geopolitical lane. That tone resonated particularly among younger populations who had grown skeptical of externally anchored solutions. One early observable impact was diplomatic recalibration. Rather than maintaining a singular security pipeline, Burkina Faso increased regional coordination first, strengthening alignment with neighboring states facing similar pressures. The alliance of Sahel states became more than paperwork. It became insulation. A second signal emerged in messaging discipline. Officials avoided overt ideological alignment while stressing optionality. That distinction mattered. Diversification was framed as leverage, not allegiance. Observers inside the region noted something subtle but important. For the first time in years, external partnerships were being evaluated publicly through the lens of utility rather than historical habit. That shift in evaluation criteria changed the tone of national debate. From that point forward, discussions about defense cooperation, including conversations that later appeared in Burkina Faso news coverage, were no longer isolated events. They were part of a broader recalibration sequence. And once recalibration begins, The strategic environment rarely returns to its previous baseline. Before this phase, external partnerships followed a familiar rhythm. After it, the tempo changed completely. The trigger came quietly. Regional pressure intensified. Sanctions discussions surfaced. Diplomatic signals sharpened. Then, movement accelerated. Mali shifted posture. Niger recalculated alliances. Burkina Faso coordinated. Talks multiplied. Channels widened. Momentum built fast. The formation of the Alliance of Sahel States marked the first visible break from previous security assumptions. It showed three neighboring governments preparing collective responses instead of relying primarily on distant guarantors. Reactions followed immediately. Analysts speculated. Headlines framed. Foreign ministries monitored. Next came the outreach phase. Delegations traveled. Meetings occurred. Options expanded. Among those conversations were defense discussions involving Iran, a country long accustomed to operating under sanctions and pressure. That detail amplified attention because it suggested experimentation with partners outside traditional frameworks. The tempo tightened again. Commentary polarized. Some called it strategic independence. Others warned of risk. Meanwhile, inside policy circles linked to Ibrahim Traore, the sequence was interpreted differently. Not as disruption, as sequencing. First internal coordination, then regional insulation. Only after that, external diversification. That order mattered, because it meant outreach did not emerge from isolation. It emerged from preparation. The aftershock phase is still unfolding now. Diplomatic narratives are adjusting. Global observers are recalculating. Regional actors are watching closely. What changed cannot easily be reversed. Once a state demonstrates willingness to open multiple negotiation channels, every existing partner must reconsider how it engages. That is the lasting residue of this timeline. And timelines like this rarely end where they begin. The scale of this shift becomes clearer when measured, not described. Numbers do not react to narratives. They reveal pressure patterns. Across roughly 15 years of sustained external security engagement in the Sahel, billions of dollars were committed through military operations, training missions, surveillance infrastructure, and stabilization programs. That figure signals magnitude of investment, not success. The meaning is simple: resources were massive, yet outcomes lagged expectations. A second metric highlights speed rather than size. Within just a few years, in the early 2020s, 3 Sahel states experienced military power transitions, followed by sanctions, threats, and diplomatic strain. That compressed timeline indicates acceleration of political stress, not isolated coincidence. Rapid shifts suggest underlying structural tension reached a threshold. A third number brings the human dimension into focus. Across conflict-affected zones of the region, millions of civilians have faced displacement during the prolonged insecurity cycle. That statistic represents lived disruption, not abstract analysis. When population movement reaches that scale, it signals systemic instability. Placed together, these 3 measurements form a pattern. Long duration, fast escalation, large human impact. That combination is rare in international security environments and usually forces strategic reassessment. This is why diversification decisions linked to Ibrahim Traore are interpreted by analysts as calculated responses rather than impulsive gestures. Quantitative pressure accumulated first. Policy adjustment followed. Data rarely tells a story by itself. But when duration, velocity, and human cost align in the same direction, they create weight that decision-makers cannot ignore. And that weight is what makes the current moment heavier than it first appears. Not everyone interprets these developments the same way, and serious observers acknowledge that disagreement is not only normal but necessary when assessing strategic shifts of this scale. Competing interpretations can sharpen understanding rather than weaken it. One strong argument from critics is that expanding security discussions with a sanctioned state introduces reputational and financial risk. They point out that global banking systems, aid channels, and defense partnerships often operate within compliance frameworks influenced by Western policy. From that perspective, even exploratory engagement could trigger scrutiny, slow funding, or complicate diplomatic access. Their concern is not theatrical. It is procedural. Supporters of diversification present an equally structured counterpoint. They argue that reliance on a single external architecture already carried risk, because dependence limits bargaining leverage. If one framework fails to produce security improvement, despite long investment, testing alternatives becomes rational rather than reckless. They emphasize that observing how another state manages sanctions pressure does not equal adopting its conflicts. Placed side by side, both positions reveal something important. The disagreement is less about ideology and more about risk calculation. Each side is evaluating which uncertainty is more dangerous, staying inside one system or navigating several. Seen through that lens, the choices associated with Ibrahim Traore are not simply political gestures. They resemble strategic experiments conducted under constraint. And experiments, by definition, are designed to produce information. What changed the trajectory was not a headline, not a speech, and not a single meeting, but a structural realization inside Sahel decision-making circles. Diversification itself can function as leverage. Once that idea took hold, the meaning of every external conversation shifted. Engaging multiple partners no longer signaled alignment. It signaled optionality. That distinction altered the strategic equations surrounding Ibrahim Traore. If a state proves it has several channels available, negotiating power increases automatically because no counterpart can assume exclusivity. Pressure loses force the moment alternatives exist. This is why one diplomatic visit attracted disproportionate attention. It was interpreted less as a partnership choice and more as a demonstration that choices exist. The implications travel beyond one country. When a region historically treated as a geopolitical arena begins acting like a negotiator, external actors must adjust their expectations. Influence stops being assumed and starts being bargained. From this point forward, every interaction involving Burkina Faso is filtered through a new question. Is this alignment, or is this leverage signaling? That question opens a deeper layer of the story, one that suggests what has been visible so far may only be the surface of a longer strategic transition. What follows moves from strategy to reality, because once leverage shifts on paper, consequences begin appearing in daily systems people can actually see and feel. The effects do not stay inside diplomatic rooms. They travel outward. At the state level, decision pressure intensifies. Officials must balance external relationships carefully while proving that diversification produces measurable results. Every new partnership raises expectations that security conditions, border coordination, or institutional capacity will visibly improve. If those indicators stall, credibility weakens. For businesses, uncertainty becomes the first reaction. Companies tied to logistics, infrastructure, or trade routes begin reassessing risk exposure whenever geopolitical alignment appears fluid. Some investors pause. Others wait for policy clarity. Market hesitation is rarely ideological. It is mathematical. Among civilians, perception shifts fastest. People watch outcomes, not communiques. If daily safety improves, confidence grows. If attacks persist, skepticism returns. Public trust follows tangible results, not diplomatic language. Regionally, neighboring governments observe closely. If diversification produces stability gains, similar strategies may spread. If it produces friction, caution will dominate. Either way, the experiment does not stay contained. It becomes a regional reference point. Internationally, major powers recalibrate posture. When a smaller state demonstrates willingness to engage across multiple blocks, established partners must decide whether to adapt, compete, or apply pressure. Each choice signals that influence future negotiations. All these layers point to one grounded conclusion. The consequences are no longer theoretical. They are already moving through institutions, markets, communities, and diplomatic channels at the same time. The most likely path from here is gradual recalibration rather than sudden rupture. If current patterns continue, Burkina Faso will keep expanding diplomatic channels while avoiding exclusive security dependence on any single external actor. In that baseline trajectory, tensions persist but remain manageable, and adjustments unfold step by step instead of through shocks. A more optimistic scenario depends on measurable outcomes. If diversified partnerships help strengthen training capacity, improve coordination among Sahel states, and stabilize key regions, confidence could rise both domestically and internationally. Under that condition, Ibrahim Traoré would gain negotiating credibility, and external powers might respond with more balanced engagement rather than pressure. The worst-case path is not dramatic collapse but gradual constraint. If new partnerships fail to produce concrete improvements, or if competing global actors begin pulling the country in conflicting directions, policy flexibility could narrow. Financial channels might tighten. Diplomatic friction could increase. Strategic room to maneuver would shrink. None of these trajectories is predetermined. They depend on decisions, discipline, and timing. The most important thing is not predicting which scenario unfolds. It is recognizing early signals that indicate which direction events are beginning to lean. After examining the strategy, the numbers, and the possible paths ahead, the question narrows to something more personal. What does this shift mean for someone watching from outside the Sahel, particularly from the United States? For those who follow geopolitics closely, this moment offers an early look at how multipolar competition is reshaping negotiation patterns. Understanding these adjustments before they fully mature provides analytical advantage. For professionals connected to energy markets, defense industries, or international trade, diversification strategies in one region can indirectly influence pricing, alliances, and policy debates elsewhere. Even distant recalibrations ripple outward through global systems. For viewers who feel detached from international affairs, it is worth considering that global security structures shape domestic priorities more than they appear to. Defense budgets, diplomatic alignments, and foreign policy commitments eventually intersect with domestic policy choices. Remaining indifferent is also a choice, but it carries the risk of surprise when shifts become visible at home. Whether you are deeply engaged, indirectly affected, or cautiously observing, understanding the logic behind moves associated with Ibrahim Traoré reduces uncertainty. Information does not remove risk. It reduces shock. And in a rapidly adjusting global environment, reduced shock can be a strategic advantage. Solutions cannot remain abstract when stakes are structural. If diversification is to become durable rather than symbolic, execution must follow clarity. At the leadership level, the first requirement is measurable security improvement within defined time frames. Objectives should be concrete: enhanced border surveillance coverage, improved intelligence coordination among alliance of Sahel states members, and verifiable training benchmarks for domestic forces. Progress must be tracked publicly to build credibility. At the institutional level, partnerships should be evaluated by what they leave behind. Does cooperation strengthen a domestic production capacity? Does it transfer knowledge rather than create dependence? Does it expand financial flexibility without narrowing diplomatic options? These questions determine whether leverage becomes sustainable. At the regional level, cohesion inside the alliance must remain operational, not ceremonial. Joint exercises, intelligence sharing, and coordinated response protocols should function routinely rather than symbolically. Regional anchoring reduces vulnerability to external pressure. For citizens, awareness remains practical. Monitoring outcomes rather than rhetoric encourages accountability. Public discourse focused on results, not allegiance, helps preserve strategic discipline. Execution is the dividing line. If plans translate into visible capacity gains, autonomy strengthens. If not, optionality becomes illusion. The difference will be measured not in speeches but in systems that function under stress. Earlier, the story centered on a shift in tone and posture. Now it circles back to meaning. The emergence of diversification under Ibrahim Traoré was not a theatrical gesture. It was a response to accumulated experience, regional recalibration, and global transition unfolding at the same time. What began as frustration with a security model evolved into an experiment in leverage. Viewers have moved from the initial question about one diplomatic meeting to a broader realization about systemic change. The narrative is no longer about a single country choosing sides. It is about whether smaller states can negotiate among larger powers without surrendering agency. That journey matters because it reframes perception. Instead of viewing the Sahel as a passive arena, it becomes visible as an actor attempting to write its own lines. The weight of that attempt carries risk, uncertainty, and possibility in equal measure. Sovereignty is tested in outcomes, not declarations. Whether this experiment matures into durable autonomy or collapses into renewed dependency will define the next chapter. And from this point forward, the choice is no longer abstract. Strategic discipline will decide the direction. Each viewer may carry a different conclusion, and that is part of what makes moments like this significant rather than routine. Some may see caution. Others may see opportunity. Many will see uncertainty. If this story felt worth understanding deeply, it may also be worth letting others encounter it with the same context rather than fragments. Awareness spreads fastest when people share insight. Not just headlines. Conversations matter here. Not arguments, not slogans, but thoughtful exchanges that test ideas against evidence. Moments of global transition are easier to navigate when more people understand the forces shaping them. So the real invitation is simple. Reflect on what you have just heard. Consider where you think the trajectory leads, and bring that perspective into discussion with others who are also trying to make sense of a changing world. Because no one is analyzing these shifts alone. There is a growing community of observers, thinkers, and learners watching the same turning points together.